Look at the last words of David for a moment. Here again, I mentioned the fact that many of us don't keep up our piano technique like we should. So imagine having to sit down at the piano. I always dread it when I have to play this on the piano in rehearsal because I have to practice it for an hour ahead of time just to play all the scales and octaves. But fortunately with the organ and all these magic doorknobs that we have, you can forget about it. Just play it within one octave and you can have two hands to do it. Begin down at the bottom of the keyboard, naturally, because otherwise you'd run off the top of the keyboard if you didn't with the runs at the beginning. Now when you get to the last measure on the first page, it's hard for most people to play that triad anyway, to play that chord. But even if you did that and put the B in the pedal, you still don't have anything left to play the scale with. So I just simply change that to a triad. And there's a 16-foot stop or coupler on at that point, so you're getting the effect, and then it leaves you the hand free. When you turn the page, the top of page 4, it isn't marked, but it's here again, in order to get the complete chord that he wants, you'd have to play G. Now that's quite a stretch. Some of us can stretch it, some of us can't, from the G down to the E. And I find, particularly in performance pressure, sometimes I would be more apt to play. So what you can do is simply, most organs will allow you to do it too with the registration you have on. Take the E, the low E that's in the chord, the half note E, and simply play high E on the pedal board. That's what I'll do when I get there. And you can't tell that you're not playing it on the manual. Just little tricks like that. On page, it's numbered 5, it's the third page, again at the bottom. You certainly don't have to play those in octaves. What I like to do is use the upper line, beginning on tenor C, and maybe use flute 16 and 4, or 16 and 8 even would work there. You really need to have one hand free because it's circle 2 there in the last measure. You need to bring in the melody line. Turn over please to page 6. All through the bottom of that page you're going to be wanting to affect a crescendo. And I don't bother to take off the strings and the celeste, because if you're going to use the crescendo pedal a little bit, that will bring on a few principles or help it. If you've got enough thumbs and enough pistons like on this organ, you can gradually make the build up. But I think sometimes we can get too fussy with it for the effect that we're going to get. In the orchestra, there's harp here also. So this organ is innocent of a harp. It doesn't have a harp. But you can play, if you have a harp or a big fat flute of some kind, you can play, let's see if I can approximate it here even, on the bottom of the page. I won't do that this morning, but if you have a harp, that's one place where it would be perfectly legitimate and permissible to use it. If you don't, it needs to have some kind of movement there rather than just a held chord, so that I would repeat at least some part, if not all of those chords at the bottom of page 6. When we get to at the bottom of page, I've gotten them out of order now. Bottom of page number 7, you'll be bringing out the melody. But notice that the melody continues then inside. You need other stops to bring out the top melody rather than having the top voice continue as part of the melody which is started. Then on page 10, no, I'm sorry, 8, next page. Depending on how much organ you've gotten on, it's going to be difficult to get it off in those first couple measures without there being a bump somewhere along the way. Yes, you can labor for hours and get those two measures so that they're absolutely seamless, but you know what? The choir's singing, and they're not going to hear a slight bump. So that, you use your time and your energy and your pistons where it's really going to matter, and don't matter for the occasional bump that will come along. Something enormous, yes, of course. But you're going to want to get back to the same registration at the last measure at the top of 8 that you had at the bottom of that third page. Then when you get to the last page, it's important to begin, as I have it marked, on middle G rather than the upper G, and use a 4-foot flute. By using a 4-foot, you'll get the effect of having the higher pitch. But if you begin on the upper G, when you get to the very last note, you're going to be playing on the key cheek because there's no D there. So that's the reason for using a 4-foot stop and beginning in the middle. Let me drive this past. Oh, if you're playing and conducting this piece at the same time, it's awfully hard for the choir to know when you're going to get to the top of the scale. So if you're playing and conducting, I've always found it's best to look at them just before you begin and give them a measure of tempo, like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. And if they get the clock going inside of them, they will come in right on beat 3. Circle 3, I mean, the top of page. Drop out the pedal here mainly because you run out of notes, but also because it's easier to have the organ just sneak out behind the voices there so that all of a sudden the organ just doesn't drop out. And if your tenors aren't secure, you can play these notes. If they are, you can even leave them out. Now here I have 2 flutes on, an unenclosed flute, which will be needed on the grate, and then one on another manual, so that as things get softer, you transfer up to the enclosed one only. And then you can get a diminuendo at the end without the unenclosed flute sticking out. And when you get to Thus saith the Lord, page 19, principles are okay. But most baritones are going to draw themselves up to their full height and let fly with a high D at the beginning. And it's sort of a heralding thing. If the Lord's going to say something, why not throw in some reeds? Get it exciting. Keep it. Etc. Then when you get down to all the 16ths at the bottom of the page, where he's going to shake, then you can go to strings if you want. Whatever you do, don't chord there. That's definitely a place where you have to have it. Because he's shaking the heavens and the earth. And you will help convey the mood of the text.
In the Hallelujah chorus, you play all the notes in the pedal?
Yeah. Well, you mean all the notes. You mean all those on the bottom line. Well, I attempt to. What page are we on here? 171. Yeah, I think so, but be sure you play them in the right octave. No. And don't keep it too legato either, depending on your acoustic. In fact, don't keep anything too legato in a piece like this. This is where Elijah heals the widow's child, and the child rises. And the widow then gets very excited. She's heard my prayer, the soul of my son reviveth. Don't play around on some nice sounding 8 and 4 foot stops, even with a little reed or two thrown in. Depending on the soprano, and usually the sopranos for these things are pretty hefty, back them up with every ounce of organ that they can possibly take. And when you get to the bottom of the page, right before she lets fly with that final, my soul reviveth, within reason, get the entire organ going. But at the top of the page where Elijah is, Lord my God. And then start to go here. Go back as far as you have to, but no further. And here too. Most of them can take an awful lot of organ at that point, and there's an excitement to it. That's what I meant earlier this morning by saying, don't hesitate to be assertive and plow right ahead where it's necessary, where it will be helpful. You're an accompanist, but you're also an equal artist in many ways, and if you sit there and don't assert yourself when the time comes, you haven't lived up to it.